Hi, everyone. Happy Monday again. Let me make sure I got my mic here close enough. I'm trying something a little bit different today. So, if you can hear me or see me either on the business page, in our support group, or on YouTube, go ahead and give me a reaction or a comment just to make sure. I've never um, used this software I'm using right now to try to broadcast to a couple different locations. So, I'd like to know it's working. Um, let's see. Let's. Oh, thank you. Thanks for letting me know you can see me. um, Whoever just commented, are you watching the business page or the group? I can't actually see myself in the group, which is a little concerning. All right. Well, I am going to get started on our material for today. And oh, I'm so glad you can. Okay, so you can hear me in the group. That's perfect. All right. So last week we talked about fearful dogs, reactive dogs, and that problem when they're not able to take food, they won't eat. And so you're trying to train using positive reinforcement and you're kind of stuck. They won't eat. Um, and we're going to continue that discussion today, but focus a little more on the human behavior side. So let me just jump into the slides here. Okay. So, human behavior that scares dogs is where we're going today. And this is something that can apply to you, your own behavior, if you're working with a fearful dog you live with, or it can also help you if you're trying to instruct, say, family members, friends, visitors, to behave differently around your dog. All right, I'm going to go ahead and just summarize. We won't go into this in as much depth as we did last week, so make sure to watch last week's video if you didn't already. But why are some reasons dogs won't eat around people? You know, you wouldn't like them to, I don't know, settle next to you, look at you, go over, lie down in their bed, and you want to reinforce those behaviors using food, but they refuse food. So, big picture, we started by talking last week about how eating is a behavior, and we often forget about that. We think of food as a reinforcer, but not that in order to use food, the dog has to be willing to eat. We also talked about, well, if your dog's not motivated to eat, what are they motivated to do when there are strangers around or people that your dog isn't comfortable with? And then we started on some practical approaches to change the picture for your dog so you can start using food. All right, so this material this week and last week is probably most useful for those of you who are trying to help your dog become more comfortable either around you, if it's a newly adopted dog, family members, family friends who are going to be visiting frequently, or say people like pet sitters or dog walkers. So, someone who's going to need to interact with your dog and you would like them to be able to eat around them and be comfortable. There was some confusion. We had a little discussion in the group last week about, well, why would you want your dog to take treats from strangers? And that's definitely not really the main goal here. Certainly, if you're just training your dog to walk, calmly or quietly on the street past strangers, you really don't want your dog to take treats from strangers. And there's no reason to do that. But there are definitely times, and some of the video examples I have today, you'll see these. Um, you do want your dog to be able to eat in close proximity to, say, visitors who are frequently at your house, family members, and definitely if you want to introduce a pet sitter or a dog walker or a trainer to your dog, they are going to want to give your dog treats. So that's why we're doing this. I'm not advocating for trying to get random strangers to be able to feed your dog. That's not really important and can be a bit risky. Okay, so real briefly, again, eating is behavior, which means that we have these three pieces: the motivation, opportunity, and consequence that we look at for every behavior. Normally, we're talking about problem behaviors. And this week, we're talking about eating. So you can use food as a reinforcer. And this is just a quick summary. So, again, if this doesn't quite make sense, go back to last week's recording. But we talked about how the reinforcer for eating, the behavior of eating, is yum, is that the food tastes good, presuming the food tastes good. And also, if the dog is hungry, another kind of reinforcer can be decreased feelings of hunger. The motivation to get that consequence, to either get the tastiness of the food or to reduce hunger, would come from, of course, being hungry. When you're hungry, you're more motivated to eat. But also, you don't have to be hungry to want to eat. If your dog sees or smells something good, which they may or may not have a learning history with, they will be usually more motivated to go check it out and eat it if it's offered to them. And then when we're doing training, the opportunity for them to eat is always there because we're presenting them with food. Now, when you've got a dog refusing treats, we went through this last week again, we know the opportunity to eat is there because we're trying to give them food to reinforce behaviors, but they're not taking it. And in theory, at least, if they ate the food, the taste would still be there and it would still have the ability to decrease hunger. So probably our problem here is motivation to eat, the motivation to get food that is decreased in situations where your dog is refusing food. Again, there are several reasons why a dog might not be willing to eat. And of course, if your dog is really full, like that time Jasper got into the 30-pound bag of kibble, if they're physically ill, some medications can decrease appetite. It could be that your dog has a bad history with some particular kind of food. But for most of us dealing with this, where our dogs just won't eat around strangers, but normally they will eat that same food at other times, this is our issue. They just have more pressing motivations in the moment. And if we're dealing with dogs who are fearful or anxious, often that motivation is to get themselves safe, to keep themselves alive. And that really trumps the motivation to snack. So, how can we increase motivation for food so we can use it in training? In the case that where most of you are struggling, where your dog is, you'll often say too distracted to eat or too fearful, we need to decrease those competing motivations, the ones that are causing your dog to put all of their energy into, say, driving something scary away or getting distance from something scary. So remember, we've talked about this in several past sessions, and if this is your first time with us, go ahead to the blog and you can see all of the past recordings in there. Most dogs who are behaving in a way to, say, flee from something or aggressing towards someone or something, most of the time, at least hypothetically, the consequence thereafter is getting distance, getting away from the scary thing or getting that scary thing away from them. So that is what they're motivated to get. And this is the motivation we need to decrease in our fearful dogs if we want to be able to use food in training. So here's our goal then. We want to shrink that motivation, that fight or flight kind of motivation, so that our motivation we want to use, the one for, cookies or whatever, meat and cheese, probably, if you're working with dogs, can rise to the top and we can have strong motivation to eat. So in order to decrease those competing motivations, the ones to get distance from scary stuff, for safety, for security, we need to know what makes things scary for your dog. And this will vary some, but there are definitely some common details, common aspects of our interactions with dogs that can make them more or less scary. Now, last week we talked about proximity, which is just, how close you are to the fearful dog. So if you have a dog who's fearful of strangers, a stranger approaching them or standing right next to them is usually much scarier than someone really far away. And if you look at last week's recording, you'll see some suggestions for how to set up your training context or scenario so that you can control that proximity a little better. Today, we're focusing on human behavior, essentially what we do that creeps dogs out, and what can we do instead to potentially increase the chances that our dogs will not be so motivated to get away from us or our visitor and instead use good stuff, eat food, work for food. So, what are our scariness factors? There are a lot of them, and this is not an exhaustive list, but one is orientation. In other words, what way are we facing? Here, I'm going to see if I can fix this slide. Oh, I can't. Oh well. So which way are we facing? And I like this picture. This is just a stock photo. I don't know this person, but it's like a dog training stock photo. I like it because these dogs are kind of arrayed around here like half of a clock face. And it helps us, it's a nice visual to talk about where your dog is or where you are facing relative to the dog. So, usually for most dogs, facing them directly is the most potentially sort of intimidating or scary orientation. And it may be just coincidence, but I don't know if you can tell the one of these tan dogs in the middle, the one on the right has their ears pinned back, may be worried about the stock photo trainer pointing at them. Oops, sorry about that. So this this orientation, that head-on orientation, that is the toughest for most fearful dogs, the most concerning, and will cause them to be most motivated to get away from you or make you go away. Gets a little better as you see these dogs out to the side. Now it's not quite as head-on. So, okay, a little bit better there, but then look at this little white dog hanging out in the back, pretty much out of the range of vision of the trainer. And that's one of the easier kind of angles that you can have with regard to a fearful dog. Not looking at them, not facing them, being kind of sideways or even having them behind you, although you want to keep an eye on them usually. So, what can we do instead of facing a fearful dog? Just like with dogs, when we're trying to address a problem behavior, we don't want to just try to punish it and tell them you can't do that. We want to teach them what to do instead. And the same goes for ourselves and our loved ones, friends, pet sitters, etc., who are trying to teach to behave differently around our dogs. Just saying don't face the dog is probably less helpful than giving instruction on what they can do with themselves. So turning sideways to a fearful dog can help a lot. This photo is me from years ago at the animal shelter showing volunteers, I think, how crouching sideways to the kennel to offer a treat rather than facing it can be a better approach. Oops, sorry about that. Let's look at some video examples of trainers or owners working with fearful dogs and using this kind of sideways orientation. Hopefully this will work. All right. So this is my husband, and sorry about that, pretty messy kitchen at this moment. And the reason I included this clip is because I wanted you to look at Pancake's behavior. He's the little tan dog there. Right now, you'll see my husband has his back to Pancake, and Pancake's pretty close and kind of following him because he has plates that have, something tasty on them. But watch what he does when I actually called him away. I called Pancake away. You'll see him move toward the camera a little bit because I knew my husband was going to turn around and I didn't want Pancake to be right behind him when he did that. But look at how Pancake's behavior changes when my husband does turn around. So I called him away there, and then he turns and he kind of hides. Now, Barrett does a great job right here. See how he's sideways? He's putting the plates out to the side. But you'll still see Pancake looks pretty suspicious until he moves away, and then he goes ahead and eats. This is me working with a client dog. I think probably the first time I met her, maybe the second. And you'll notice I'm kneeling down, which makes me smaller, which can be helpful, although do be aware that if you're sitting or kneeling, you may be putting your face in bite range. This dog I knew a little bit, so I wasn't as worried about it. But you'll see I'm not facing this little scared dog. I kind of have one shoulder pointed toward her. And then again, here, it was a little later in the training session, I went to sit at the table to talk to this dog's parents and see where my knees are kind of pointing sideways to the table, and I'm more like pointing my shoulder at her rather than turning to face her and look at her. So this is something that's hard for us humans, because the polite thing for us to do when we're addressing someone is to look at them and face them. Whereas fearful dogs find that pretty aversive most of the time. Here's my husband again with an artful backwards approach. And he's going to end up with one shoulder to Pancake to deliver a treat, instead of turning around to try to offer him a treat, which would almost certainly result in Pancake running away. He kind of backs up and doesn't face him. All right, couple more examples. Fearful puppy at puppy class. Our trainer Rachel sits down. Again, you can see her, like, her belly button basically is pointed at a 90-degree angle to the dog. And here, oops, sorry about that. We get to our other Rachel. Trainer Rachel here is having a meeting with a dog that she has been making friends with so that she can do walking and training with her, and see how her toes and her torso are pointed toward the curb, which is at 90 degrees to the approach angle of this dog here. So the dog is coming toward her. She is going to turn a little bit. She has to throw the Frisbee. The Frisbee is, we're using Frisbee in addition to food. And again, the dog decides to approach her. She keeps herself sideways to the dog. And you're going to see some cute little nub wiggles here in a second. There she goes. All right. So I'm pretty sure I can see questions posted on Facebook through this software I'm using right now. So if you do have a question at any time, go ahead and post it and I'll try to get to it. All right, so turn sideways. So that's one thing we can do to stop creeping out our dogs quite as much. Now staring. I don't know if any of you have noticed that staring scares your dog, kind of puts them off a little. What can we do instead of staring, though? If you just tell someone, don't look at the dog, don't stare at the dog, well, they got to do something with their eyes, right? So what should they do? It's amazing the stock photos you can find of people interacting with dogs in incredibly inappropriate ways. I don't know if you can tell in this photo on the slide, this dog is like leaning way back, trying to get away from this person. So one instruction you could give to yourself or to your visitor, or whatever, is kind of look off to the side of the dog. And I'll show some examples, some real life examples. And actually in this little video clip, we're going to start with a first introduction with a lot of distance and then move into more advanced introductions, more advanced interactions, fearful dogs and people they don't know very well. And you can see in all of them, we're still trying to use this kind of averting your gaze, looking to the side method. So in this clip right here, Danielle, who's at the left of the screen, is sitting with basically her back to Odie, who's the little dog there in the background. So not facing, not looking. And Rachel, who is holding the leash, is tossing treats and just keeping Odie at a distance she thinks he'll be okay with. He's on a long line, which is, if it's safe to do so in the area you're working in, is a nice option, gives them more freedom of movement. She actually there encouraged Odie to move even a little farther away just to make sure he was okay, because he will sometimes here, he's going to try to go a little closer. Back to this clip, just to point out now, you see how I'm kind of looking out of the corner of my eye to keep an eye on the dog, but I'm trying not to point my eyes at, and I guess maybe pointing my nose at the dog would be a more accurate description of what I'm trying to avoid. So you can still watch the dog without staring. All right, here's my wonderful husband, who does not know he's on video right now on the internet. He is obviously gets a lot of instruction from me, probably more than he wants, but he does such a wonderful job here. So this is him with Pancake more recently. Pancake has come a long way with him. And look how he is feeding Pancake treats while continuing to just watch TV. So he's being very deliberate about, he's talking to me, looking at the TV, very deliberate about not turning to stare at Pancake. So obviously hand feeding like that is pretty advanced in training with a fearful dog, but I wanted to show you how even as you move closer, as a dog becomes more and more comfortable, you can still use, and probably should still use, some of these adjustments to your own behavior, especially like the first time or first several times you're working up close with a fearful dog. Make it as easy as possible in other ways if you've made one thing more difficult. All right, so that was staring. Reaching is another big problem. And there are a few different situations in which people tend to reach with dogs. One is if they try to hand feed, they have a treat and they want to offer the dog the treat. Or another one, of course, is reaching to pet them. And I know those of you working with fearful dogs, if you have a fearful dog and you have a visitor over, or a pet sitter, or whatever, you'll probably say, please don't reach for them, or please don't try to pet them, which works sometimes, but not every time. So what can we, instead of just saying don't reach, what can we give this person to do instead? And this person could be yourself. If you have a really fearful dog, sometimes you are using these strategies on yourself to alter your own behavior as well. So one thing I like to give people to do, and again, these are people that you want to eventually be able to interact with your dog and have your dog comfortable with it. This isn't just random strangers on the street. If you have given them treats, you can give them a target to toss treats to. See, okay, just try to hit that target over there. You could have them drop treats depending on how close they're working to your dog at that point. Or, especially in this day and age, just telling someone to surf social media on their phone or something. If you're at that point where you just want them to be present and not interact with your dog at all, this can be a really good instruction. And most of us, once we start surfing our phone, will be occupied for a little bit. All right, let's take a look at some examples. Okay, so here is, I think this is my mother-in-law early on with Pancake. And I think what she's going to do here is she's delivering a treat because we were conditioning, we were teaching Pancake to hang out when someone approaches, don't run away. And I think you can just see her hand at the top of the screen, but you'll see how her instruction was, don't reach over into the pen to deliver treats, just drop the treats over the edge of the fence. So here she just dropped the treat there and moved away. And then Pancake was able to go get it. Here's my husband again. His job here is to hit the target, which is a large target of that big dog bed with treats. Just stay seated. You don't have to do anything. Just throw treats at the dog bed. And you could adjust the distance. I like movable targets like a dog bed, because if this were too close and Pancake were looking nervous or growling or barking or anything, we could back it way up. This is just a reminder that phone surfing is, for many dogs, a very unthreatening activity. So here's Barrett looking at his phone and Pancake's like sleeping next to him. All right, here is another example of doing something other than reaching for the dog, but I do want you to look at Jack's arm movements here. So he's meeting a fearful dog. The fearful dog is unleashed to maintain so that the owner can keep the dog at some distance. And he's going to be tossing treats away, which is good. But you can see that when you're trying to throw treats a greater distance like this, that throwing motion can kind of look a bit like reaching. So that's something to be aware of if you are closer to a dog. And I guess that's all relative, but close enough that a big arm movement might be scary to the dog, then you're going to want to opt for a different treat delivery method, or have the trusted person, maybe the person holding the leash, do the treats instead. Here's a look at some smaller motions involved in delivering treats. And this is also more advanced training. So at this point, Rachel is just about ready to start taking the leash and walking Angus here. You'll see she's going to drop treats. And I think she's also going to use, really small little throwing motions. So she's mostly just moving her hand a little. All right, so those were alternatives to reaching for the dog, trying to hand feed them, trying to pet them, hit a target with a treat, drop treats, or, just go look at social media for a bit. All right, so like I said, this is not an exhaustive list. There are a few others. Approach is a big red flag behavior for fearful dogs when someone's approaching them, but we kind of talked about that a bit last week, so I decided not to include it this week. I do want to talk just a little bit about bending over dogs. In this photo on the slide, that dog, I hope you can see, looks pretty nervous. Brow furrowed, mouth tightly closed, looking away from the person who's kind of hovering over them. Bending is scary. Usually bending over fearful dogs scares them, and it also is another risky situation where you would be putting your face closer to the business end of the dog. So not really a great idea. But again, you know, many people who love dogs do it all the time, and if the dog is, you know, pretty friendly, not fearful, they've been reinforced for that behavior, right? Because the dog wags and licks their face and whatever. But you know that's not the reaction that your dog is going to give. So when do people tend to bend over dogs? Really often when they're going to reach as well. So if you've already dealt with these first three things, you've talked about not facing the dog, not staring at the dog, not reaching for the dog, instead, you know, doing something else with treats. You probably have eliminated a lot of the reaching, but there still could be some. We talked about how throwing treats, like a big treat toss, can look like a reaching movement. So let's just look a little bit about, sorry about that. Let's look at some alternatives, some ways to deliver treats that don't have big arm movements, at least not toward the dog. I think it's this one. Okay, so this was the only video I could find of anyone on our team kind of bending toward a dog to throw a treat, which is good, probably because this is not a fearful dog. And it isn't even a big bend, but you see how Rachel bends over to toss the treat a distance to Coda here. So that's something that if Coda were a fearful dog or afraid of Rachel, this could be pretty threatening. So I just wanted to contrast that with other ways. Oh, here's another good example. This is early on with Pancake. So this is my mother-in-law bending over to drop the treat into the pen. So she wasn't actually reaching at Pancake, but she was reaching toward him. And you can see his response is less than friendly. I guess without the sound, he was barking and growling. And then compare that again to this other method of treat delivery, just the drop without the reach, and he did much better with that. Okay, so one thing that you can do if you're delivering treats to a fearful dog, or if you're instructing someone else on how to do it without scaring them so much, obviously smaller arm movements can be helpful. But if you're trying to throw the treat a greater distance, that can be hard to do with a really small movement. In those cases, again, you may opt instead to have someone else deliver treats if there is a trusted person. Some dogs, I realize some of you are living with dogs who have no trusted people in their lives yet. Another option is to do your treat throws, sort of obliquely to the dog, to the side, so that you're not bending over their head or in the direction of their head. So this first video, you'll see Rachel's not trying to bend as minimally as possible and tossing the treats behind Angus and also kind of to the side. So he's turning to the side. Same thing here. You'll see I'm not leaning and trying to throw treats right over Vesta's head here. I'm tossing them more to the side so that my arm movement is coming right at her. And then here Rachel is demonstrating, if you're closer up, she's doing these little hand flicks to toss treats in a way that doesn't involve a lot of arm movement. Oh, and I tacked this on just as I didn't feel like it was enough of a major category to have its own video and section today. But one thing you'll notice here with my husband, who's doing that backing up to Pancake and Juno and delivering treats, is one way he's minimizing bending here without dropping the treat. He could have dropped the treat, but I think he was probably worried about a high value treat hitting the kitchen floor with multiple dogs around, because there could be a fight. Is that he has this really long piece of this is ham, I think. So that allows him to only bend a little bit to get that to Pancake's mouth. The last little place that is really common for fearful dogs to have trouble, that is kind of associated with bending, is when people stand up from a sit. I don't know if any of you have this issue with your fearful dogs. If you're home, you have a visitor over, you think things are going great, they're tossing treats, your dog seems okay, and then the person stands up and there's a lot of yelling by the dog, possibly by you. So one thing that we ask people to do, and this is actually from some training at the animal shelter when I used to work there, is if the dog is pretty close to you and you need to stand up, you can either ask if you're not the parent, if you're not the owner, you can ask whoever the dog trusts to, hey, could you call the dog away? I need to stand up. Or if you don't have anyone else who can help with this, we would often use treat tosses to move the dog away from us before we stood up, because just standing up, especially quickly and suddenly right next to a fearful dog, could result in them either just, freaking out and panicking and running away, or biting you, neither of which we want. So here, Hillary's just going to show a little, I can't remember what that dog's name is, but anyway, toss treats away before she gets up. And here's our trainer Danielle working with an SPCA dog who is a little on the timid side. She's going to show Doris the treats, put them over there, and then get up kind of in a direction away from her, not getting up over her. Especially, I find that as I get older, there's a little bit more of a rocking motion involved in me getting up sometimes from a sit, which could look a bit like a bend and a lunge toward a fearful dog if I'm not being careful. So using food to move the dog away from you before you need to stand up is another way to avoid appearing as if you're kind of bending over them. All right, so just a quick summary. We talked about turning sideways, ways to be less scary, right? Turn sideways instead of facing the dog, look to the side of the dog instead of staring at the dog, toss or drop treats, or have someone else feed instead of trying to hand feed the dog. That gets rid of a lot of the reaching and bending. So if you take even one of these things to heart with your fearful dog, you might see a nice improvement in their training and an increased willingness to eat, because we're being less scary. So they're less motivated to drive us away. All right, since we're on the business page as well right now, I'm just sharing the link to our, oops, that's actually incorrect. Well, we have a support group that's facebook.com/groups/dogkind support. If you're not already in our support group, it's free. Really nice group of people. Feel free to join us there and ask questions. If you have any questions right now, post them in the next minute or so, and I'm happy to answer them. Have you noticed that there are some things you do that make your dog a little more scared and less willing to take treats? I have, I should have included in today's video, but I do have a nice video of my husband early on trying to offer Pancake a treat from his hand. And so there was a reach there, and Pancake was like, wasn't going to take it. And I had to remind him, like, no, just drop it and move your hand away. A reaching hand is really threatening. And then as soon as he dropped the treat and moved his hand, then Pancake was willing to eat. So his motivation for food was able to go up, and then we could use the food in training once the human scariness factor had been decreased. All right. Okay, everyone. Well, thank you for joining me today. If everyone liked this and it seemed to work okay this week, I may continue to broadcast to the business page and the group at the same time in the future. Those of you in the group, especially if you asked a question and I didn't see it, can you tag me so I can try to figure out what's going on? But I think this will work well to reach a few more people. All right, everyone, have a wonderful week. This recording will be eventually put into the blog as well, and I'll write up something this week to for those of you that are, or if you know someone who's more into reading bullet points than watching a video, there'll be that option as well. All right, thanks, everybody. Have a great week. I will see you next week.